Good morning, Anahi.
Good morning.
What are we chatting about today?
We'll be talking about understanding investments, housing and mortgages, and preparation for parents and their kids for college.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Okay, we're going back to some of the fundamentals here. These are all really fun topics. So understanding investments, there's a lot to understand about investments. So maybe more specifically, what do we want to focus on today?
Yeah. So over the last few weeks, I've been learning a little bit more about investing and how different strategies can really help in shaping somebody's financial future. I started getting familiar with different types of investments like individual stocks, bonds, mutual funds, owning real estate, and even crypto. I've heard you talk a lot about exchange-traded funds and read over it in our investing philosophy. I kind of just wanted to ask, when looking at planning for somebody's future, what do you recommend investing in?
So there's no right investment for everybody. I think it's always really, really important is I'm going to make a lot of generalizations in this conversation, but we have to recognize that investing is an individual activity, that there's a different type of investment that's appropriate for one person that's wildly inappropriate for somebody else. And that doesn't make any investment better or worse. It's just that not everybody has the same needs. You bring up exchange traded funds as a specific option or example here. That's what we tend to prefer when we manage money for our clients. An exchange traded fund is a professionally managed product from an investment company. It is typically taking the form of something like a mutual fund, which is going to be where multiple investors are putting their money into a larger pool. And then a professional management team is allocating their investment dollars into various stocks or bonds or commodities or real estate or whatever the fund specializes in. And then, the shareholders, own shares of this fund based on how much of the fund they've purchased. The exchange traded fund just takes that mutual fund structure one step further and makes it so that it can be bought or sold throughout the trading day instead of deposited into or invested into or redeemed at one time of the day, because mutual funds essentially trade once per day for their shareholders. You put your money in, it gets invested all at once. You ask to take your money out, it all comes out at once. And you can do it in fractional pieces where you don't do it all, but it all happens at the same time of day. Whereas with exchange traded fund, I could buy it in the morning, sell it in the afternoon, buy it back tomorrow, sell it 20 minutes later. There's nothing making me keep it for any particular amount of time. But we tend to favor that exchange traded fund because it has a lot of great qualities of a investment for a lot of investors.
Okay. And then kind of just like as a curiosity question, why don't you kind of prefer individual stocks like Apple or Google? Like, is that something that you also look into or?
So we don't really prefer individual stocks for a couple of reasons. The first is just being able to diversify away non-systematic risk. So if I invest all of my money in any company, and we'll use Apple as the example here. We're not saying anything good or bad about Apple as a company. We're just using it as the example. So if I invest my money in Apple stock, I'm taking on a lot of non-systematic risk. Because I am now highly dependent on the management of this company. I'm highly dependent on its innovations, its products, its profitability. I'm highly dependent on regulations related to it. I'm highly dependent upon how it's placed in the world geographically, what laws, current events, all of those things are going to potentially affect that Apple stock, that Apple company. Whereas if I have multiple investments, if I have 5 stocks or 10 stocks or 15 stocks, and they're from different sectors of the economy, maybe I own a mining company over here, maybe I own a printing company over here, maybe I own a construction company over here, If my money is spread across these different sectors and these different places, then my level of risk that I'm taking on from the management of that one company or the financial health of that one company or regulations or laws that could affect that one company is being reduced in the proportion of my portfolio. And if I have enough stocks, if I'm diversified enough, then that risk essentially shrinks down to then only systematic risks. And systematic risks are things happening at the national or international global economy level, right? Tech stocks are up because interest rates are low. And so all tech stocks are doing better because interest rates are low. housing is doing worse because interest rates are up, or gold is not doing so well right now because there's a war happening in a country where a lot of gold mining is done, or a law was passed about green regulations, and so this car company stock went down in value. But if I am diversified enough, if I'm spread out enough across enough sectors, across enough companies, then a lot of the risks at the individual company level are reduced or essentially shrunk to essentially zero. They don't go away, but I'm so diversified that one company doesn't matter. Yeah. And I only have to worry about the problems I can't diversify away because they're global problems or national problems. Mm-hmm. And I think something like an exchange-traded fund or a mutual fund then is a very hyper-efficient way to get ultra-diversified very quickly and very affordably, instead of going out there and trying to buy 500 stocks individually and figuring out how much I'm going to buy them all for.
Okay. And then following up from what you touched on earlier, you mentioned how you could buy in the morning, sell in the afternoon, and do the same thing the next day. How active is our involvement with ETFs? Is it something that we have to go into daily? What does it look like?
So I'm, as the person who runs the investments for the firm, I'm looking at the market constantly throughout the day. Mm-hmm. And I say that, and now I'm about to put a caveat on that. Mm-hmm. I don't recommend anybody else does that because the market is, constantly good, constantly bad. There's always a reason to be excited, and there's always a reason to be panicking. And so you do have to have a fairly strong professional sort of comfort with that. Just because if you are easily, scared by current events or excited by current events, then that's not a good investing thing. But I'm essentially monitoring them constantly. It doesn't mean I'm trading constantly. One of the important maxims of investing is a buy and hold strategy. It tends to be very effective over the long run. That generally speaking, we want to buy something not because we think it's going to make us a lot of money right away, but because it's going to make us money over the long run. And so if I'm, buying it and selling it and buying it and selling it, I'm undermining that process. Mm-hmm. So we tend to trade more on a rules-based approach where there's certain conditions that we want to meet before we make a purchase or a sale of an investment for a client. Mm-hmm. And that just approaches, investing with a little bit more discipline. But then in terms of the ETFs, we are doing the research on the funds that we're ultimately investing client money in. And then we're monitoring those and their peers very closely to be, high confidence that these are still the types of investments we want to hold, that the management of the fund itself is doing a good job, that it's competitive in its marketplace, mm-hmm. that it's performing well, that it tracks its particular index or its particular objective very closely.
And then just to tie it up all together, I've heard you bring up toolbox analogy. How does this fit into ETFs?
Sure. So the toolbox analogy is a way of trying to understand the relationship between accounts and investments. A very silly thing you'll hear as a financial advisor from people is a question that sounds something like this. What is the rate of return on a Roth IRA? Or what is the rate of return on a 401k? And if you understand the difference between those accounts and the investments, you know that those accounts don't actually have anything to do with the rate of return. Their tax treatment may affect the net of tax return, but it will not do anything about the gross return. So accounts, whether it's a retirement account, whether it's an individual account, a college savings fund, whatever it is, these are all toolboxes, and they are going to dictate the tax rules and the distribution and contribution rules about how much money you're allowed to put in, how much money you're allowed to take out, when you're allowed to take it out, and whether there are tax ramifications to transactions in the account that can be good or bad. That's the box. Mm-hmm. An ETF is an example of a tool that goes inside that box. The ETF is going to do the investing part of this, where that's going to be where we make or lose money on the investments. Stocks can be tools, bonds can be tools, cash can be tools, certificates of deposit, U.S. treasuries, right, mortgages, all sorts of things that are financial instruments ultimately become tools that can go in our toolbox and help us accomplish objectives pertaining to certain financial outcomes.
Okay. And then something you also brought up last week after our discussion of my introduction with stocks and my interest in stocks, you brought up a very interesting study that kind of covered patterns among different ethnic groups. Can you talk a little bit more about this study?
Mm-hmm. Well, so it's not a study; it's multiple studies. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of data sets. Mm-hmm. So, like the Federal Reserve has the survey of consumer finances they do every 3 years, where they survey thousands of people about their income, their expenses, their assets, their debt, their liability, all sorts of stuff. Mm-hmm. A lot of studies have found disproportionate holdings of certain types of assets among different ethnic groups, across different geographies, different cultures, religions, all sorts of things. One of the phenomenons that's readily observed in the financial research world is something called the stock holding puzzle. And the stock holding puzzle essentially makes a basic argument, and it goes something like this. Stocks or stock market investing, right, investing in the market, broadly speaking, has been the most reliable and consistent builder of wealth over the long term for most of its history, compared to more volatile assets like commodities, thinking gold, silver, compared to cash, bank deposits, compared to buying rental properties. None of that is to say people haven't made a ton of money in gold or a ton of money in real estate or a ton of money in crypto or anything else. But just generally speaking, right, if you have to pick an asset with the best track record of wealth building, it on a risk-adjusted basis, it is generally speaking investing in the stock market. And so that stock holding puzzle really says, okay, if that's kind of well known in the academic research and all the data that's available and so on, why don't more people invest in it? And then second question, why do certain groups of people invest in it more and others invest in it less? And so the example here being you see less stock market investing among ethnic minorities. So you see less stock marketing investing amongst Latino, Hispanic populations, amongst Black populations, but you see more of it in Caucasian populations. You see it more of it in certain subpopulations like people with Jewish heritage. You see more of it amongst Asian populations. But then if you go down to the level of, let's say, Chinese or Korean or Japanese, you see differences in those groups. So all this to just say, it's an interesting phenomenon that we have a ridiculous amount of data showing that investing in the market is a great way to build wealth. But there's a cultural or a geographical or theological resilience or hesitation in certain places to use that tool to build wealth effectively.
Okay. Just to dive in a little bit deeper on the question that you asked, why don't people invest more, or what do you think would change people's views in investing, like in stocks, like you said?
I think a lot of people don't do it because they don't understand it, right? And it's very easy to say, I understand a rental property. I buy a house, an apartment, a duplex, something like that. I buy this structure, and then I charge somebody to live in it. Like that's a business anybody can wrap their head around, right? Because we are all consumers of housing, whether we live in our parents' home, buy our own home with a mortgage, rent an apartment somewhere. We get that. We have a familiarity with that. Stock market investing can feel very abstract, right? It's not tangible. Like when I buy Apple stock, nobody shows up at my house with like a box that says Apple on it and says, here's your stock. You used to get certificates back in the day, but that's not really a thing anymore. And so it feels very abstract and disconnected from reality, right? So people like tangible things. People like buying gold or silver because they can get the coins and put it in a safe and whatnot. So there's a lot of comfort with things. So I think that's one thing, is just a lot of people don't really understand the market, and that lack of understanding drives kind of uncertainty, and uncertainty then drives inertia, where they ultimately go like, well, I would, could, or should save or invest, but I'm not comfortable with it, so I just won't. But maybe I will one day when I get it. The other one I think is avoidant. There's plenty of stories about people getting really badly hurt in the stock market. A classic example of this is the observation, I think it's Warren Buffett who says, the stock market is a mechanism for separating money from the impatient to the patient. But what that really translates to is a lot of people start investing in the market when things are good, right? Mm-hmm. They're hearing about, NVIDIA stock. It's gone up a ridiculous amount over the last couple of years. You got to buy NVIDIA stock. It's going into infinity. So you better buy some now. Or you should buy Bitcoin or crypto because it's going into infinity. You got to buy it now, or it's never going to be this cheap again. But then in turn, they bought it on an emotional fear of missing out, FOMO. And in turn, when the market goes down, inevitably, the market will go down. There's not a single asset on earth that does not occasionally lose value, either in nominal amounts or significant amounts. And that same fear kicks in when it goes down. They go, well, I bought it and it was so expensive and now it's worth 20, 30, 40% less than it was. Gosh, it's going to go to zero now. The same thinking about it was going to go to infinity turns around. Now it's going to lose all its value. So I better sell it before it happens. And so you look at scenarios like the 2008 market crash, where all you had to do was not sell anything for 2 or 3 years, and you would not have been any worse off had the crash not happened. But a lot of people, you sold. The market went down 20, 30, 40, 50, 60% in certain areas at certain points, or the dot-com bubble, or the COVID crash. And when people panic and they sell and lose money, that can create some generational trauma at their individual level and also in their family members, right? I was living a good life with mom and dad, and then they lost everything in the crash. And so now I'm scared as their child or their grandchild, right, to invest in the market because I saw what happened to my family when they did that. So all that to say, there's a lot of reasons people don't get into it. I think, again, some of it is knowledge-based and just fear of uncertainty. And for other people, it's fear of loss. And I can give you a very logical, rational reason to point out that the fear of loss is grossly overstated and that the knowledge is easy to come by, but that's not helping anybody.
Yeah. Well, the reason why I thought that it was very interesting is because my family is Hispanic, and a lot of my uncles do remodeling. So kind of going into our next topic about housing and mortgages and stuff like that, I wanted to get a little bit more deeper into that conversation. I think one of the biggest decisions is in their financial picture is buying a home. I do hear a lot of people talking about buying a house, remodeling it, and then selling it. How long does it usually take to break even from selling a property? How do you profit from selling a house?
Well, so are we thinking about, I just heard your context here, but I want to make sure we understand that there's different versions of this. Are we thinking about, I buy a house, I move in, I live there, and I sell it someday, and I'd like to make money when I do that? Or are we talking about, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to do that remodeling thing, the fix and flip, and then I'm going to sell it soon after?
The fix and flip.
So the fix and flip is highly individualized to the project. So there's no magic number here. But essentially the basic idea here is we want to buy a property that could use some renovation or some improvements. We want to put those renovations and improvements into the property quickly and ideally affordably. Particularly renovations or improvements that improve its, I like to call it, its Instagram appeal, right? It was kind of this old dingy kitchen from the 60s, and now it's beautiful, nice carpet. You see like the millennial gray type of stuff that's been super popular for the last 5-10 years. So all this gets done, it looks beautiful now, and then we can sell it. We bought it for, let's say, $300, and now we put in $40,000 worth of improvements, and now we can sell it for $400 or $450 and make money on that. That activity, some people would argue with me about this, so take it with a grain of salt. I don't think of that as an investing activity. I only think that's an investing activity if you are hands-off on that. So if you're just putting money into the projects, but you're not involved in the projects. But if you are personally buying a house and then renovating it and then selling it, I would argue what you have is a highly paid job. You're an entrepreneur. You're building a business around improving housing. And that's your business. But it's not the same thing as investing where I put my money into it and I don't have to do anything else. It just is going to grow in value or it's going to pay me dividends. So I think it's a very different approach, but it is a very popular way of people think about investing or making extra money because, again, it's tangible, right? If you've got the skill sets to do the carpentry or the tile or whatever it is, then it can be a way to make a lot of money from an income standpoint. But again, I differentiate that from thinking about that as like a return on investment.
So now touching on the other hand from what you first talked about like actually living in the property and then selling later on. I've heard you talk about capital gain tax exclusions. When do these become helpful?
Well, I mean, they become helpful as soon as they exist because then I don't have to pay taxes. So right away.
Yes.
What we're really talking about here are what are called Section 121 exclusions. And then there's some other exclusions we can talk about here in a moment. But Section 121 very succinctly essentially says for an individual who lives in a property for 2 of the preceding 5 years. So I don't have to live there for 5 years. I just have to live there for 2 years. But if at any point I live in this property for 2 years out of the last 5, then I, as an individual, gain a $250,000 capital gains exemption on the profit of the property. And if I'm married, we both get that. So then we both get that, and that's added up to a $500,000 exclusion. So if I bought a property for, let's say, $300,000, and we live in an up-and-coming neighborhood, and we live there for 2 or 3 years, and now it's worth $500,000, but we want to move for some reason, and we sell it, we are not going to pay any capital gains on the sale of that property, because that $200,000 difference is less than the $250,000 or the $500,000 exclusion.
Oh, okay. And then I also recently heard, following that topic of like people who actually are in the house for long term, I heard the saying, marry the house, date the rate. Kind of wanted to know more about refinancing. I know that it's when the interest rate drops, the 30 years start again, and the monthly payments drop as well. How significant does the drop have to be to actually act on it and refinance a home?
Well, let's talk about how we get to that marry the house, date the rate thing first, because there's a good reason behind it, but there are some problems in the assumption that it implies. That is a phrase you hear from a lot of agents, a lot of mortgage brokers, etc. And I'm not going to say they're wrong, but I think we have to be a little bit more cognizant of what's being said here. Because what they're saying is the rate isn't great, right? The interest rate's going to be 6%, 7%, whatever the number is. But don't worry, someday, right, rates will come down and you can then refinance and then it'll be cheaper. So like the rate is temporary, but the house is forever. There's a couple flaws in this assumption. Number one, the average tenure in a house in the United States, like how long somebody lives in a home, is about 6 years. So the average person who buys a home, in turn, sells their home, moves to a new home about every 6 years. So you may not have this rate for 30 years on average. Doesn't mean people don't buy a house and stay in it for 30 years and live there forever. But there's a factor there where you might pay that rate the entire time. The second thing is that it assumes that rates will come down. That is not a given. That is not a guarantee. It depends on where they were when you bought. It depends on what happens in the economy and what happens in monetary policy with the Federal Reserve and other factors to see whether rates ever do come down in a significant way. Because I would argue the transactional costs you're likely to incur on a refinance, which some mortgages come with very cheap, like for $100 you can refinance things. Other mortgages you're going to have to pay full closing costs again, and it's going to cost you, hundreds or thousands of dollars. That it could take you years or even decades to break even on your reduced rate. So if you went from, let's say, 6.5 to 6.25, and you had to pay $4,000, that could take you years to break even on. And then if you sell the house in the interim, then you never broke even on it. You just lost that money. So there's that point of caution. The other thing is that there is a positive side to this. It's not to say it's all negative. The idea behind marry the house, date the rate is there is a push-pull when it comes to real estate prices and interest rates. When interest rates get high, housing prices tend to stop or slow down or even come down a little bit because the affordability to borrow to buy the house declines. On the other side of it, if the affordability doesn't change in a material sense, and interest rates come down, then prices often will start to go up because people will say, like, well, you can borrow cheaper. Your monthly payment is going to be less because the interest rates are lower. So the price is now going to get pushed up a little bit because it's still more affordable to buy than it was when the rates were higher. So the idea here is if rates are high, the good news is prices probably aren't going up in any serious sense. And so it's probably cheaper price-wise on the house now than it will be when rates come down in the future. So buy the house now, eat the really high interest rate, and then one day when rates do come down, giant quote marks here, eventually, certainly it must happen, as if something couldn't not happen. But assuming that it will happen, then you can refinance and then it'll be more affordable. That's the basic idea that's going through here.
Totally not using that for my own knowledge.
Well, I mean, you bought a house for your parents, and based on the timeline, I'm guessing you did not get a 3% mortgage.
No, most definitely not.
So, I mean, there's a world here where if rates come down enough, it makes sense. But my point here is, A, it makes more sense the longer we intend to stay in the home. But if we're not certain we're going to stick around, then we probably want to be careful about that. The second thing is, beyond that, we probably don't want to refinance over like a 0.25% change just because the transaction costs are probably high relative. But I think when you get to 1%, 1.25, 1.5, 2 even, depending on how high the rate was, then it makes a lot more sense. Because A, you'll probably recoup the difference quickly. And then B, the trick here is if we want to do some wealth maximization, we can always refinance, get our lower rate. Let's say our payment was, I'm just going to make up numbers here. Our payment was at the high rate, $3,000 a month, but now with the refinance, it's $2,400. If we could afford the $3,000 before, then we would be smart to either keep paying $3,000 and get the mortgage paid off that much faster if the rate is not great. Or we can take the $600 and turn that around and put that into retirement savings, college savings, emergency funds. But the real key here on the wealth building side is to not reabsorb the savings of a refinance back into your lifestyle, because that money was doing something productive for you by paying down interest and building equity in your home. And if you suck it back into your lifestyle, now it's just fun money and it's no longer helping build wealth.
Interesting. Okay, well, in light of big goals and events happening in people's life, like buying a house, I also wanted to touch on preparing for college for parents and their kids. I think a lot of stress is making sure that parents can support their kids' education without putting their own financial future at risk, especially for first-generation college families, as there is no clear roadmap to follow. I kind of wanted to know, what do you think is the best way to prepare for college, and when should they begin? Like, I'm guessing when a kid is like 2 years old, you're not thinking about, oh, they're gonna need a college fund or something, because they don't know how to do anything at that point. So when do you start planning? So
here, this is your example. There's actually a really good example of the stockholding puzzle at work. Right? We have clients who are investors. They contribute to their 401k, their IRA, all of that. And their very first question to us when they tell us, like, hey, our daughter was born, right? Meet our daughter Jane. Second question, how do we open a college fund? Right? Like that for a lot of our clients is a very natural, like, we have a child, therefore we have a responsibility to start saving for their college. They don't skip a beat on that. So there can be cultural things there. Now, other people will, get to with the point where their kid is 6, 7, 8, and then go like, oh gosh, I guess they're gonna be going to college at some point. Better start working on that. But the answer here is, first of all, as early as possible, because we have the time value of money to help us compound for that many more years if we save as early as possible. The second thing then is just going to be the vehicle for it. The best vehicle available specifically for college savings right now, or the toolbox, to use the earlier analogy, is going to be a 529 plan. Every state has a 529 plan. They might have several different 529 plans. You do not have to participate in your states. You can pick any state, but different states give different incentives based on whether you use their plan or other states' plans, or some states don't offer incentives at all. So that can affect your choice of plan. Here in Colorado, for example, you want to use the Colorado plan because you get a tax write-off if you use the Colorado plan, but not if you use a different state's plan.
Okay. And then can you talk a little bit more about that 529 plan, or is there any other investment strategies that you recommend for college savings?
Sure. So the benefits of a 529 specifically are, in a state like Colorado, is that you get an income tax deduction for your Colorado income tax. So for every $1 you put into your kid's 529 plan, you're getting 4.4 cents back in your state income tax. So that, or you don't have to pay that. So then that's just a tax savings to you, where you can now use that savings to offset the cost of contributing. The other benefits then are that contributions to 529 plans are tax advantaged, meaning that once they're in the 529 plan, they will not be taxed on an ongoing basis. So it can grow, I'll say loosely tax-free, because we'll talk about where taxes could show up. And then if you use them for qualified expenses like tuition, books, the dormitories, those sorts of things, then you can spend the money tax-free. If they don't go to college, or if they do go to college but you save too much and there's some money left over, you can convert it into a Roth account for them and put money towards their retirement. Or at the very end of it, if we don't use it for college and we don't put it into retirement, we can take the money out, but we'll have to pay taxes on it. We'll have to pay some penalties on it because its purpose was for college, and so they don't want people using them as investment vehicles for any other purpose.
Okay. And then following that 2-year-old kid that I mentioned at the beginning, now they're 16, 17 in high school, and they're starting to prepare for scholarships and applying for FAFSA and stuff like that. I personally fell into this because I didn't know the difference between qualified and non-qualified scholarships, and I had to pay taxes for that. So what is the difference between those two? And I guess how does it affect taxes?
Well, I want to back up here for a second, because you had asked what other strategies there were, but I think there's actually you're segueing into the next topic, which is a good place for us to go. But I think there's a good intervening step here, which is, what if my kid doesn't go to college? Or conversely, what if my kid is a great student, athlete, scholar, and gets a bunch of scholarships? A lot of parents like to hedge their college savings by doing individual investment accounts instead of college funds. The downside is they have to pay more taxes along the way, but they have flexibility. It doesn't have to be for college. That's very helpful. You can take money out of certain retirement accounts, either certain balances based on the type or up to a certain limit based on the type to spend on college and not pay penalties. You may pay taxes, but not penalties. So there's a couple of options like that. When you get into the scholarship side of things, I think two things are true. I think one, too many parents think their kid is going to just get like a full ride. The vast majority of students do not get substantial amounts of free financial aid. Financial aid is often just a euphemism for student loan programs, getting Stafford loans. Maybe you're eligible for Pell Grants based on income or certain state grants, but financial aid often just means student loans, not real like free scholarship money. That gets us to your qualified and non-qualified. Very simply, some scholarships are from and to sources where the money is paid to the institution and is not incurred as income to you. Others are essentially just a gift, but because it's not a like a friendly arm's length gift, it's it's essentially income, then it's taxed as income. So scholarships specifically for things like tuition, where it's paid directly as tuition assistance, tend to be in that category where they're not going to incur taxes. Scholarships where somebody just like gives you a check and you're supposed to use it for school, but you don't have to use it for school, often get treated as income just because fundamentally it's possibly income and not tuition, and so it doesn't enjoy the same tax advantages.
Yeah, I was very excited when I saw the full amount covered, and then I was like, these people are so nice. They're just handing out money for like students, and I was like, they're so nice. And then I did my taxes that following year, and I had to pay taxes back, and I was like, I was very confused as to like how that happened, or like, I mean I didn't realize that it was going to be considered as income when it was still going for school, but that's very interesting.
Well, and again, it really just comes down to, if the money is paid directly to the university, so like let's say you have rich grandparents, they want to pay for your college. If they just pay directly for your college, they can do that to an unlimited amount, and there's no gift issues there or tax issues there at all, because they're paying tuition directly to the institution on your behalf. But if they said, Anahi, we want you to go to Harvard, we're going to give you $50,000 a semester, and they just write you a check for $50,000, well, that's a gift, and that gift could be subject to gift tax rules. Not the same as your scholarships, but it's the same principle where one of these is not touching you as an intermediary, and so because it's going directly to this institution for this qualifying expense, it's tax-free. Other ones, because it's going to you, and money is fungible, so you could have just spent that money just as easily on beer. Then because you could have spent the money on beer, it's taxed as income. Not specifically because of beer, but just because it could be spent on something other than school. No,
I definitely learned that after, because they were like, this is your taxable income. And I was like, well, I didn't even see this money. Like, it just went straight to school. So I was very confused. So that was another question that I had.
So in all of this, right, you're now in your fourth week with us, learning financial planning, going through all that. So what have you learned in the last week or two that you think is beneficial for our audience to hear about? Yeah,
so I've been able to see a lot of the behind the scenes work. So it's been very interesting for me to see. But I learned how 401k allocations work, as well as the key factors that we consider when looking for investments that support the long-term retirement savings. Like in particular, I learned about the expense ratios and how those are like an annual fee charged for managing investment funds. So I thought that was interesting. So we were looking through those and seeing like the differences between them. I was able to see a couple different ones. So I learned that part. And then talking about investments, I learned about target date funds, which really caught my attention. I thought it was really interesting how they kind of operate on their own. You kind of just set a date, from my understanding. You set a date of like, or year that you plan to retire, and then it kind of does its job until that year. But I thought it was very interesting how it can be helpful for somebody who wants to be more hands-off of their investments. But yeah, that's what I learned.
No. I think target date funds are this is a strange way of putting it. They're either a bad solution for a good problem or a good solution for a bad problem. The example here being they solve a very key problem, which is I don't know how to invest. And if I enroll in my 401k plan and they offer a series of target date funds and I don't know how to pick, I will have a recommended target date fund that should align to my retirement. And so if I'm older, it'll be more conservative. If I'm younger, it'll be more aggressive. And all things being equal, that's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
The reason I say there's sort of a bad solution in a certain sense is there are a lot of inefficiencies and problems within target date funds because you are, and this is just an unsolvable problem, but you're trying to create a one-size-fits-all solution for a person who is 25 or a person who's 30 or 35 or whatever it is. And so even though it means in general it's doing a good job of its core function, investing on your behalf, automating that whole process for you, it's not doing it for you. It's doing it for a version of you. And so, like anything else, right? You know, you go to the store and buy clothes, and if they're of a certain size, right, they should fit you, but maybe they don't look good on you. Maybe they don't work well for you. Maybe it's not your color, whatever it is. Same thing in target date funds. It definitely solves a problem right out of the gate for a lot of folks, but it's not an optimal solution for the problem that it's solving. It's just a great default solution for people.
Yeah, it kind of came up when we were talking about the 401k allocations. And I kind of noticed how we kind of skipped over those. And that's why I asked that question. Why don't we tend to go for those? And it was kind of explained that if you have somebody who's actually going into your investments and looking at stuff for you, those kind of don't make sense because they flow on their own, basically. So.
And there are a lot of financial advisors who do recommend target date funds for their clients. So it's not to say that they are never a good solution for folks. We manage 401k plans for client businesses, and we have selected series of target date funds for our clients to use in their plan so that if their employees enroll in the plan and don't know how to invest or don't know what to pick, then something is picked for them that does that for them. So they are a really good tool in that particular sense. They're just not bespoke or customized to the individual. And if you're paying somebody like a financial planner to do this stuff for you, we probably shouldn't be picking target date funds for you at the individual level because our job is to build a portfolio that aligns to your individual goals and your individual timelines.
Okay. Yeah. That all makes sense.
There you go. Well, thanks for chatting.
Sure. Thank you.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.